This program contains graphic material, including offensive language. Viewer discretion is advised. It's just another night on Chicago's South Side. Mobster Al Capone may have run this town in the 20s, but for 3 decades, a vicious street gang had the city in a stranglehold. They called themselves the Black Pea Stone Nation. They claimed to be about brotherhood.
You know, we were doing it for what we believe in.
They meant it. They died for one another, stoned to the bone.
They say they were the saviors of the streets.
Didn't start out as a gang. We protected the store owners, we protected women, the mothers, the families.
But as it turns out, these Robin Hoods were just robbing the hood. We take an inside look at their violent world, where their religion was guns and greed, and their goal, absolute power.
I don't want to walk in fear, I want to walk as fear.
I had to excel in something, and I did excel in violence. In my worst, I was Satan.
No one was safe, especially the cops.
I could not go down the street as a Chicago policeman without being in fear of my life.
They controlled the neighborhoods with ruthless efficiency. But when their world collapsed, it left a power vacuum that turned the streets of Chicago into a war zone.
It used to be honor among thieves. It used to be honor among gangs. Now it's no honor.
Gangland.
14 years before 9/11, an Islamic group planned to launch a terrorist attack against the United States. The mastermind of the plot wasn't a foreign-born extremist. He was a gangster who controlled the south side of Chicago from a federal prison cell hundreds of miles away.
This guy had such an aura, and he had such loyalty. The people would kill for him.
Even from behind bars, gang leader Jeff Fort could put the squeeze on anyone through his personal army, known as El Rukns, Arabic for the Cornerstones. Fort used prison phone lines to call commands back to his gang's Southside fortress. Federal authorities feared his reach and set up wiretaps. Fort spoke in his own bizarre code.
Those other figures that they would like to drop one of those there, the signs of showing blonde.
With the help of informants, authorities were able to crack his message. It revealed something shocking. The gang was negotiating with agents of Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi. In return for $2.5 million in cash, gang members would carry out terrorist attacks on American targets. Fort wanted to prove his merit and plotted an attack on his own city.
They were going to show people that they were the real deal by taking the truckload of gasoline, taking it down to the middle of the city somewhere in a loop, emptying it into a sewer, and then lighting it up and seeing what had happened.
They are terrorists. We don't have to go to Afghanistan. We don't have to go to Iraq. We got our own little urban terrorists right here.
These urban terrorists, who took aim at Chicago, had started out as supposed defenders of these very same streets under another name, the Blackstone Rangers.
Our organization is a non-violent organization. We fight to protect it, and we're not the enemy.
At its height, some estimate Jeff Fort held sway over 50,000 followers. Even to street cops like Dan Davis, Fort was an imposing figure.
This guy was the real deal when it come to leadership. Scared the hell out of you, look him in the eye.
Members of Fort's gang were known as soldiers and referred to their group as the Nation. Their symbol, an Egyptian pyramid, reflected their African heritage. Over the years, they wore a variety of uniforms, but always in their chosen colors: red, black, and green.
I went to one Nation meeting. I'm not exactly, it looked like it was around about 20,000 men out there. You just hear Blackstone, Blackstone, Blackstone.
They like to claim the Stones really began as a civil rights organization. committed to defend and empower downtrodden African Americans. It was a good PR strategy. The 1950s, Chicago's South Side. John and Annie Fort had supported their 10 children by picking cotton in rural Mississippi. In 1955, they moved their family to Chicago, where John got a job at the U.S. Steel plant. But the South Side was crumbling, even as its population was swelling. White flight sent residents and business owners racing to the North Side and the suburbs. Many whites who remained resented the newcomers. Racial tensions ran high and often erupted into violence.
So it was a lot of cocktail bombs thrown at us, a lot of beer bottles, a lot of N-words, and things like that.
Illiterate and small for his age, Jeff Fort dropped out of school in junior high. By the age of 12, he and some former classmates formed a group for protection, calling themselves the Blackstone Rangers, after the street where his family lived.
We done a lot of things to help the black community. We put a lot of protection because the police, they weren't doing it.
At first, membership was voluntary. Then the Rangers began strong-arming neighborhood youth they felt would help toughen their image. One of those recruits was James Anderson. He's now a Cook County prison chaplain. But in the 1960s, his nickname was Satan.
I didn't have a conscience. I'd do it to you before you did it to me. I would take you to the edge of town and blow you away and go home and eat chicken potato salad, never think about you no more in life. And so they started calling me Satan.
Satan was known to be quick with a gun and even better with a knife. His vicious reputation had caught the attention of Jeff Fort. It was the 4th of July, 1966, a celebration for millions of Chicagoans, but not 16-year-old Anderson, who was the leader of a small South Side gang called the Satan Lovers. Anderson says the Disciples, a rival gang, had beaten his friend's mother to death and left her body in an alley. Satan was bent on revenge. Under the cover of Independence Day fireworks, Anderson snuck into a group of disciples and unloaded his weapon.
I shot everybody I saw. If you looked like you was a disciple, I shot you. As I saw him fall, I felt good. I felt I was revenging my friend and his mother. I just didn't have enough bullets.
11 people were injured. Satan spent the next 2 years in prison. Within days of his release, Anderson says Jeff Fort approached him and offered him a leadership position in the Blackstone Rangers. It didn't take him long to make his decision.
I said, well, let me think about it and let me get back to you. And then somebody else said, whatever you do, don't refuse Jeff. You might come up missing. And there was a lot of people who came up missing.
Satan's style fit in perfectly with the gang. The Blackstone Rangers would brutally beat anyone who robbed a residence or business in their home base, the Woodlawn neighborhood. Business owners gave the boys free meals and a little money in order to stay on their good side. The power was seductive, and the gang was soon exploiting the people they claimed to protect. Anderson remembers the swindle.
We offered our services, and it was advisable that you accept it. You just withdrew your protection, your shop would get broke in, the glass would have got broke, and somebody would set it on fire. Some people would call that extortion. Wouldn't I? Now, yes. Then, no. I was offering in service.
By 1966, Jeff Fort was in his late teens, and his club was a bona fide gang with an estimated 1,500 members. Turned out, Fort had the talents of a CEO.
He was no dummy. When it came to making money, he knew how to generate money.
As the success of their extortion business grew, so did the gang's involvement in other illegal activities. Before long, nothing happened in Woodlawn, be it prostitution, car theft rings, or illegal drugs, without the Blackstone Rangers knowing and taking their cut.
We didn't pimp any women. Okay, we pimped the pimp. You got your women out there, okay, that's your business. This is our business, okay. What are you making? We want a percentage.
Retired Chicago Police Superintendent Terry Hilliard was a patrolman in the 1970s. He watched the Blackstone Rangers grow into a criminal organization that Capone himself would have admired.
You're talking about the advent of the black organized crime, the black mafia. If you didn't comply in paying, you could wind up with some broken bones, being shot, maimed, or wind up being a statistic in the homicide stats.
And as the Stones took control of the city, they unleashed a display of carnage not seen since the gangster days of the Prohibition era.
Capone gets all the press, but in that period between the 70s and the 80s and into the 90s, the gangs in Chicago were much more vicious than Al Capone ever thought of being.
In May of 1969, Chicago police officer Richard Peck was driving through a South Side neighborhood when he heard someone shout his name. He turned, and in broad daylight, members of the Black P. Stones opened fire on his car.
And I can see those bullets jumping. I was hit in the head, the back, shoulder, and the front.
Shot 15 times, he stumbled from his vehicle.
I got up, and blood was shooting out of everything. And then when they ran, the people come out and everything, and I told them I was a police officer. Would they take me to the hospital?
No one in the neighborhood would help him.
None of them, they wouldn't take me to the hospital. They wouldn't even come close to me. And so I got in my car, and I drove myself to Chicago Hospital.
It was clear the police had lost control of the city's South Side. Throughout the 1960s, under the watchful eye of their charismatic leader, Jeff Fort, the Blackstone Rangers grew into one of the biggest black gangs in America. The Stones were amassing an empire through petty crimes and extortion schemes. But they had one lingering threat to their operations: their rivals, the Disciples. The two gangs turned the South Side neighborhoods into a war zone.
It was fierce and it was nice, but the guns came in. We would meet at a certain place and the Disciples be on this side and the Stones would be on this side. So you have a riot in the middle of the park.
When they killed a disciple and he was in a funeral home, the Blackstone Rangers would go to that funeral home when they'd having a wake or something and dump his body out of the casket and shoot it.
The Blackstone Rangers needed more firepower to fight the Disciples, so they forged alliances with 21 other small neighborhood gangs called sets. The Allied sets called themselves the Almighty Black P. Stone Nation.
What that P stood for: progress, prosperity, power, peoples.
By the late 1960s, membership in the Stones swelled to nearly 5,000. Gang leader Jeff Fort created an inner council to maintain control over the different sets and govern their activities. They called it the Main 21.
And the Main 21 were 21 different chiefs from 21 different sections in Chicago. The Main 21 had their own gangs, okay? They would have board meetings.
They would meet together and cut up territory. Who was going to get the dope bag, who was going to be able to sell in a particular area.
Jeff Fort led the Main 21 in basement meetings at a South Side church. James Spates was rising through the ranks of the gang in those days.
Jeff, he would tell us what he do not want. and what we shouldn't do. And then we as the leaders will go back into the community and enforce that.
Each of those 21 gang leaders kept his own council to lead his set. The ranks were full of younger, newer members called soldiers. Jeff Fort and his main 21 started laying the groundwork for expansion. Though Fort himself was illiterate, he wanted his soldiers to be educated in order to open up new business opportunities for the nation.
Education was always a thing. Hey man, you better get to school before you get your head swole up.
With a high school diploma, gang members could apply for influential city jobs. That way, they could use insider clout on behalf of the gang.
He paid people bonuses to try to get in city departments, whether it be the police department, forestry or what, you know. At one time, they tried to become a political muscle here in this city.
In 1967, the nation flexed that growing muscle. Jeff Fort won the faith of local churches and Chicago civil rights leader Jesse Jackson. Jackson bragged that he baptized Fort into Christianity. His half-brother, Noah Robinson, did business with the Stones. Fort joined a local group, the Woodlawn Organization, in a plan to open a job training school that would benefit the Southside community and line the pockets of his gang. The Stones showcased for the press how disadvantaged teens would be taught by none other than the gang's leaders.
Any more questions?
The new school received a federal grant of nearly $1 million. Chicago police were appalled that gullible bureaucrats would make such a deal with the devil.
My God, the federal government are giving them a grant. For what? The gang members who are reaping havoc and chaos in our neighborhoods across the city.
The Blackstone Nation seemed unstoppable. As their clout and membership grew, they spread out across the city.
We was everywhere. We was from state to the lake, from 7 to the 11, north, south, east, and west. It was Stones everywhere in the city of Chicago.
Fort's nation had grown so powerful that he had no qualms about holding press conferences and publicly threatening Chicago police officers. It was a threat that the gang was more than ready to make good on.
And there's not going to be no killing without killing, gentlemen, with all due respect. Definitely not going to be any killing without killing, you know. And I would like that to be clear for the record. And I understand the fact that we got police in here. I wanted you to be here to understand what I said.
The police were outmanned, and they knew it.
They were more powerful than the police. I tell you the truth about it.
Either the community was on the side of the Stones, or deathly afraid to go against them. Chicago, 1967. The Black Keystone Nation was one of the most powerful organizations in the city, with a membership in the thousands. Jeff Fort and his gang wooed the Southside community through a job training program, yet controlled neighborhoods with brute force. This undercover officer, who is protecting his identity, remembers the iron grip the Stones had on the community.
Jeff Fort, in the old days, if you consider him having on his thumb, no, he had him under his trigger finger.
In the summer of 1967, the police department created a special gang intelligence unit to gather information on the inner workings of the Stones. What they learned was terrifying. The gang was run like an army. Soldiers in the nation were expected to follow a military-style ranking system and operate under a strict code governing their behavior.
You couldn't never mess with another man's woman. Robbery, home evasions, all that was a no-no. It's pillow talking. Pillow talking is when you're telling your woman what's going on with the nation. That's not for a woman to know. Homosexuality, that was a no-no.
They were also forbidden to use drugs harder than marijuana.
All your members gonna be snorting drugs, and before you know it, you have a drug-fed organization. So you can't have it like that.
Breaking the rules resulted in a violation.
Brothers hit you all in your body for a couple of minutes, make you strong, make you a man. You know what I'm saying? Tighten you up.
More serious infractions could warrant a shooting in the leg or arm. But gang members who were disloyal got no second chance. Officer Richard Peck remembers working with one gang informant until the Stone leaders learned he was a rat.
He had a meeting. Then they'd all go around and each member would kiss him on the forehead. And the last guy, called the Ghost, he kissed him on the forehead and shot him.
The informant's body was found a few days later in an abandoned building. The Stone Army demanded loyalty, and they had to be ready to fight to the death at any time to protect their neighborhoods and their drug territories. In the early 1970s, James Swamp Fox Spates shot and killed a rival gang member. He pled guilty to manslaughter and spent 5 years in prison. But with hundreds of Stones already behind bars and the occasional guard on the payroll, the gang felt they had the run of the prison system. Being a Stone meant that it was no big deal to serve a bit.
The penitentiary was wide open. You had alcohol, you was getting visits from your girlfriend. They could do anything in the joint.
And serving time was a badge of honor for any Stone.
The power, the prestige, the reputation, it really kind of magnifies and it really kind of certifies who you are when you go to jail.
As powerful as they were in the prisons, on the streets, the Stones demonstrated their power not only by breaking the law, but on a few occasions, keeping the peace. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. And riots raged in black communities across the United States and on Chicago's west side. But the south side of Chicago stayed comparatively calm. Former gang unit detective Rich Kolovitz credits Jeff Fort.
Jeff went to some shop owners and sold them cards they could put in a window. It said Black P. Stone. The people knew that they couldn't loot, rob, or break the windows on that store because it was being watched.
He told us don't burn up our neighborhood because we got to go to the store. You can't burn up your own community.
But the Black Stone Nation was starting to show cracks. Their federally funded job training program had come under scrutiny from authorities. Gang leaders were supposed to mentor disadvantaged students, but within a year, several of those so-called teachers were accused of rape. Authorities were also hearing disturbing tales about the gang's recruiting methods.
They snatched some off the street, off bus corners, waiting to go to their regular schools. Kids that resisted too hard were beaten or, in some cases, murdered.
The government began investigating the nation for mismanaging grant funds. Jeff Fort was called to testify in front of a congressional committee. But even in front of Congress, Fort flaunted his disrespect for authority. He answered their first question.
Will you state your name, please?
Jeff Fort.
Then stood up and walked out the door. Despite this show of contempt, Illinois Senator Charles Percy invited Jeff Fort to the presidential inauguration of Richard Nixon in January 1969.
What type of message is that sent to law enforcement and the people who are putting their lives on the line every day to go after folks like this? It was a slap in the face. More, it was like a Louisville slugger in the face.
Fort declined the invitation, but Chicago police had every right to feel betrayed. A little over a year later, the Black P. Stone Nation went after one of their cops. In the summer of 1970, gang unit officer James Alfano responded to a call. Shots had been fired in a Southside alley. When he arrived, he saw a couch blocking the end of the alley. Alfano had driven into an ambush.
There were about 7 or 8 Blackstones in different positions up on roofs, and they fired down on this car.
Alfano died from his wounds. The shooting is commemorated on August 8th, a day marked as a Stone holiday. It's celebrated with Stone reunion picnics in Chicago's parks. For the city's police, Alfano's murder marked the day they began to fight back with force.
That was the beginning of the end for the Stones at the time, because that's when the kid gloves came off.
It became all-out war. It wasn't the police with the citizens anymore. It was us against them. And they made no bones about it that they would kill you.
Jeff Fort and his Black Pea Stone Nation had a reputation for dealing in drugs and death. But it was their political ambition that marked the beginning of their downfall. In 1972, federal agencies completed their investigation into the Stones' mismanagement of a $1 million job training grant.
I feel that it perhaps could be, donated again, funded back up. Ever since I heard that this committee was handling this investment, I felt, all the time, that it was gone,
Fort was convicted of embezzling less than $2,000 and was sentenced to 5 years in Leavenworth Penitentiary. In his absence, his governing council, the Maine 21, led the nation.
When the big dog go, the little cats come out. They was getting guys whooped, was using drugs, brothers holding meetings and sitting there nodding off.
In 1976, Fort returned to the streets with plans to revitalize his nation. He had a new name, a new religion, and a plan to demonstrate his destructive power to the entire United States. In 1976, Jeff Fort walked out the doors of Leavenworth Penitentiary a changed man. He had built himself up physically and adopted what he said was a new spirituality. He had converted to Islam and wanted the entire nation to embrace his new values. Many suspected the religious conversion was a ruse.
Jeff learned in prison that if you become a religious organization, that law enforcement can't surveil you, can't do certain things to you, and it's a good way of hiding things.
He changed the name of the gang to El Rukns, Arabic for the Cornerstones. He began calling himself Chief Malik, the Arabic word for king.
It was another ways to a means to legitimize the Black Stone Ranger because there was a lot of killings. They were using the changing of the names to give them a different shade to the community, but nobody bought it.
The members were nicknamed Moes due to their supposed Moorish influence. They referred to the women of the group as Mobiduses.
We couldn't curse back then. Once he brought the El Rukn organization and manifest, it wasn't no MF and no none of that.
Fort dissolved his inner council of set leaders, the Maine 21, and elevated a small group of generals to lead the El Rukns. Anyone who didn't convert was excommunicated or killed.
If the chief wanted you eliminated for a reason, you would be eliminated. Even his own leadership. Any number of top leaders who stepped out of line, they were killed.
That is what police informants say happened to Fort's second-in-command, Mickey Cogwell, when he refused to become an El Rukn.
Jeff was sitting in the back of the limousine. Mickey was in the car next to him and picked out his finger and pointed like the gun and went poof. Approximately a week later, Mickey was killed.
Some believe Jeff Fort ordered the hit. Mickey was shot down in cold blood while he stood on his own front lawn. No one was ever charged with the crime. But many soldiers followed Fort into his new religion. Every Friday, El Rukn members met for religious instruction at their headquarters in a former movie theater, which they nicknamed the Fort. It now served as their mosque, though their activities were often less than holy.
The Fort was used everything, cutting up their drugs to hiding their weapons and their partying and any and everything that they wanted to use it for. It was a huge building with a lot of hidden places and crevices and all of that.
You had the big room where the meeting was at, then you had the upper rooms where the guns were at, and then the orgies were at, so whatever you wanted, you could get it at the fort.
But the party was short-lived. In 1983, Jeff Fort was arrested again, this time for interstate marijuana trafficking.
It's getting to be a real sick problem with people that's constantly trying to use us as some political football.
Fort was convicted and sent back to prison. El Rukns fought in court to be recognized as a religion by the state. It would allow them to meet behind bars for private, unmonitored religious services. In a 1986 decision, a federal judge ruled against El Rukns, declaring them merely a gang. They wouldn't be able to use the First Amendment as a shield against police surveillance. And there was plenty for authorities to see. Without its charismatic leader, El Rukns' unity began to crumble. The generals came up with a new and highly illegal plan.
We had to pay water bills and all that. We was making money to take care of our movement, to take care of our hood, to take care of the organization.
Gang members formed a special unit called the Guerrilla Family and began selling heroin on the south side. But the new strategy backfired. Darrell Lamb was a member of the Guerrilla Family.
This stuff got out of hand real quick. You become addicted to drugs, either selling it or using it.
Most dealers tried to resist using their own product, but those who handled the merchandise faced serious occupational hazards.
When you fix heroin up, it's a fume come off of it. And when you open it up, that fume go right into your face. And you're like, you feel good. That's how the dope go have you.
Heroin flooded the streets. Violence erupted as both junkies and dealers tried to get the cash to keep the dope flowing. The gang that once claimed to help the South Side had become its most dangerous enemy.
We protected the community, and then as we progressed into other areas, other veins of activities, they can't, wait a minute, y'all leaving your mission statement. You're bringing a plight on us. Look like you're hurting us more than you're protecting us now.
Fort directed some of the drug traffic from behind bars by telephoning commands back to the headquarters. The authorities were listening in on wiretaps. He spoke in elaborate code to disguise his directives. In 1986, the code was cracked with help from informants. Mecca was the name for Chicago. Perfect meant marijuana. Orange was $50. But the most terrifying revelation, Fort was offering the support of his personal army to an enemy of the United States.
Brother Raouf. Yeah, from Libya.
Agents of Muammar Gaddafi were negotiating with El Rukns to kill Americans on U.S. soil. In return for $2.5 million in cash, gang members would carry out terrorist attacks on command, including shooting a commercial airliner out of the sky.
He saw a way to make money from Muslims long before the government even perceived them as a threat, a real threat. He saw that terrorism might have a buck to it.
Undercover agents offered a military-issue rocket launcher for sale on the black market. And El Rukns took the bait. A secret tracking device led federal agents straight to Fort's gang. In August 1986, authorities raided the fort.
They torching through the back door. So I smell it, and I hear them coming through. They everywhere.
They tore it down, and everybody took a brick and cursed the day that they got rid of us.
In 1987, Jeff Fort became the first American convicted of planning terrorist attacks against the United States on behalf of a foreign government. Fort is currently in the maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado, with no chance of parole before his 91st birthday.
That's where he belongs. He's a violent killer, and he hurt his own people. He's a Judas and a murderer. He had an opportunity. He was a natural-born leader. and he used it to screw over the people that really needed help the most.
Ford's incarceration didn't finish the gang. Surviving members rebranded themselves, going back to the name Black P-Stones. Without the leadership of Jeff Ford, the Black P-Stone Nation continued to disintegrate and continued to make national headlines. In 1988, Noah Robinson, the half-brother of then-presidential candidate Jesse Jackson, was imprisoned for ordering El Rukins to kill 2 people. He received a life sentence for his gang ties. The upheaval and lack of leadership led to an all-out war for power within the Black P-Stone Nation.
Between 95, I would say in 99, the Stones were at each other's necks, attempting to take some type of power. Every time we went on a crime scene, it was either a general or a high-ranking member that was either getting shot at or shot.
For years, the leader of Chicago's most powerful gang, Black P-Stone Chief Jeff Ford, had kept tight control over the illegal drug trade in Chicago. He didn't allow crack because straight cocaine racked up bigger profits.
They kept crack out, I'll say that for him. Crack was everywhere except in Chicago until Fort went down.
With Ford in prison, 2 of his sons, Joaquita Valenzuela and Antonio Ford, had each taken over an area of the Stones' territory. They both broke their father's rules and paid a high price. Antonio ran an area of the South Side nicknamed Terror Town. He was known as a loose cannon who was creating his own empire.
Nobody respected Antonio. They thought he was just a little punk. Antonio Ford had his own drug thing going on, ripping off dope dealers, setting up a deal, and then show up with the money and just take the dope and keep the money.
Joaquita ruled a neighborhood called Motown. He seemed to have his father's charisma.
He has a leadership ability, you know, but he had that respect.
Joaquita ran the family business just as he had been taught, but with one exception.
He was living in a very big, very nice house, driving expensive cars, doing the opposite of what Jeff always taught him to do. You know, he was doing a lot of show and telling.
His flashy style got him noticed by police. In 1997, Joaquita was arrested on drug trafficking charges and sentenced to 30 years in prison. That same year, the bullet-ridden body of his brother Antonio washed ashore on the Illinois-Indiana border. Antonio's renegade business antics had angered someone high in the ranks of the Black P-Stones. A beating was authorized, but the violation got out of hand.
Looked like he had a good workover with a bat. Sources told that this was sanctioned by way up, and whether it be Ford or the generals, was sanctioned up high.
Thugs at the people swore their loyalty to these gangs, but at the end, if you don't live up to what your expectations, you just become another homicide statistic in the annals of the Chicago Police Department.
Without strong leadership, the gang splintered into dozens of smaller sets, each with 1 or more generals.
Instead of being Black P-Stone or Black Stone Rangers, okay, it was splintered to Posse Rangers, Suicide Rangers, Satan Lovers.
These new leaders gave up any pretense that they protected the neighborhoods. In fact, they often abandoned the hood altogether.
Generals live in the suburbs, they go to church, they take their kids to school in the morning. Their wives sometimes have normal jobs, and they use a beater car at the beginning of the week, and they'll drop off what they call the work.
The work is drugs, and it's sold on neighborhood street corners. Generals can make up to $20,000 a day from their lines. But there is no united leadership to delineate drug territory, and control over each street changes with the speed of a bullet.
If my corner is not making as much money as your corner, then I'm gonna take your corner. You just take them for a one-way ride. And then the next day, you get the corner.
Shorties, kids often as young as 10 years old, act as lookouts and hold the drugs.
They would recruit kids. They'd want to commit a theft, commit murder, shootings, because they knew if they were under a certain age, they couldn't be prosecuted and they wouldn't be sent away.
At the end of each day, the young soldiers are given cash or jive.
If they don't have what they call receipts at the end of the night or the product, in some cases they're beat with bats, in some cases they're killed.
The drug dealing and violence have created chaos in Chicago's South Side neighborhoods.
The kids are the ones who become the victims because on the drive-by, the leader's not out there. They're the ones getting killed while he's sitting at home watching television.
Bishop Ford, his street name, started dealing drugs for the gang in 1992. He was only 9 years old.
I didn't have nobody to buy me the clothes and the things that I needed. At the age of 10, $100, $150 in your pocket is a lot of money.
Ford thought he was part of the Peastone family. But when a customer turned on him, he realized his new family wasn't there to protect him.
He kidnapped me, wouldn't let me go, held me down, stabbed me in my chest. I woke up still bleeding. He walked me to a nearby beach and tried to throw me in the water and leave me for dead because he thought I couldn't swim.
The experience changed Bishop Ford's view of the gang and its alleged values.
We lost the education and we lost the whole message of the movement. So now it's basically, there is no laws, there's no, the way it was with love, justice, and it's not no more of that.
The Black Peastones still talk about empowerment, loyalty, and family. But everyone knows talk is cheap, especially when it comes to cold, hard cash and the illegal drug trade.
They use the gang for the recruitment. They can put all kinds of signs and say Stone Love, but they're doing it for the narcotics.
You think about it and you might shed a tear like, man, I gotta stop this. But some keep on like, man, you ain't gonna stop. You're making too much money.
To some of the old Stones and El Rukins, the violence of the last 4 decades seems like the good old days compared to what happens on the streets now.
I believe the whole city is worse off now. All they did was like open the gates of hell because the streets are so wild now. And they still killing people like it's with no remorse.
In 2001 and 2003, the city of Chicago was named the murder capital of the United States. It recorded more homicides than New York City, an urban area with nearly 3 times its population. Jeff Ford may say he once dreamed of empowering Chicago's African-American community. But the reality of drugs, death, and domination on the South Side by the Black Peastone Nation has made his true legacy a nightmare.
I think the younger generation is saying, who the hell is Jeff Ford?
The drugs was the downfall of a mighty nation. I believe that we could have been something like the NAACP. The drugs divided us because the money divided us.
If there is a religion for this new generation, it's the religion of self.
It's just eye for eye, me for me, I gotta survive, and I don't care about nobody else.
There's no denying that the Black Peastones gang has left its mark on the streets and in the cemeteries of Chicago. And the Stones are still on the move, still on the make.
If you live in an upscale neighborhood, you might look up one day and you might have a gang getting ready to operate a deal in drugs on one of your corners or in your alley behind your garage.
The nation has been rail planted in the city. You can't never get rid of it. When I'm dead and gone, it's still gonna be here.
I never thought I was gonna live to be this old. I never thought I would live to be 21, and really didn't care. And that's the mindset of a lot of the warriors that are in the gangs now. They never think that they're gonna live to be 21, and they really don't care.